Hello and welcome to the Cyber Distortion Podcast series. I'm Jason Papillon, CISSP, along with Kevin Pentecost, also CISSP. Together, Kevin and I have over 50 years of experience in information technology. And with this experience, we hope to dispel the noise that we all hear around cybersecurity. So Kevin, why don't you share with our audience a little bit about what they can expect in the upcoming sessions?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. We've said this before. The genie's out of the bottle now. No turning back. We've been talking about getting this cybersecurity podcast off the ground, and I'm super excited that we've finally done that. The overall goal is really just to bring relevant topics to the listening audience and hopefully allow them to take away actionable items that can make them better prepared for cyber breaches, protecting themselves from personal identity theft, things like that. We're going to hit on lots of relevant topics throughout the week, bring in lots of guests, and hopefully keep this thing exciting for you moving forward.
So let's get started. We got a lot of fun, a lot of great information to share with you. Let's get going.
Here we go, baby. Episode 1.
In 2016, it was estimated that every 40 seconds a business falls victim to a ransomware attack. In 2021, that frequency increased to every 11 seconds.
Although ransomware has really been around since 2013, it has not yet been seriously taken in terms of something that could impact critical infrastructure such as the pipeline.
This is probably the most significant ransomware attack on one of our critical infrastructures.
Last month, hackers took our gasoline hostage. Now they're attacking our meat supply.
JBS says units in Australia and North America were hit over the weekend by what the company is calling an organized cyber attack.
Are you and your organization safe, or are you lost in the static? So, lost in the static, right? You know, we just saw several key headlines, and by the way, all of those headlines were attacks that occurred in 2021. All of those occurred in 2021. They were major attacks. And the thing that stands out to me the most is when we look at some of these attacks in more detail, it's the stuff we don't know, that we weren't really privy to or didn't really understand. So like this water treatment plant attack that happened. This happened the week of the Super Bowl in a town just outside of Tampa where the Super Bowl was being held. And the hacker gained access to the computer systems in this water treatment plant and was remote controlling the computer system. The reason why, the fundamental reason why he had the ability to remote control this system was because the system was running on an old version of Windows. The system had not been patched and updated. That's the fundamental reason why. And the only reason why it was stopped was because an engineer saw the cursor moving across the screen as the hacker was increasing the amount of chemicals that's being distributed into the water system. 100 times the amount of lye, which is the major component in Drano, was distributed into this water and was being distributed into this water. And the only thing that stopped it was the hacker saw the screen. The engineer saw the screen moving across the cursor move across the screen and was able to stop it and turn the system off and then go back in the system and reduce the chemical levels back down to their normal rating. And we see this stuff happening consistently and increasingly more and more. Like the Colonial Pipeline. Kevin, you've talked about that one often. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, good God, that's a scary story you just told there. If you think about what terrorists could do with that kind of power if they got access to these systems. But the Colonial Pipeline, yeah, ransomware breach impacted 45% of the East Coast fuel systems and delivery systems on the East Coast. 5 states were impacted, crippled the entire East Coast. You saw and you heard about in the news, it triggered panic buying. And we saw that in many states on the East Coast, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and even as far west as Texas. And I can say that because I live in Texas and we saw it. Literally, the store across the street from us didn't have gas for 3 days. And it's because the news was in, pandemonium over this breach. and nobody knew the impact of it yet. We're still wondering, is this going to impact the entire country, or is this regional? What's going on? And you know how people are. They just start to freak out and panic, and next thing you know, the grocery shelves at your grocery store are empty and everything else. And that's just human nature. In the end, Colonial Pipeline ended up paying this ransom, which was requested 75 Bitcoins, which at the time, about 5 million US. Paid it, got the decryption key, and tried to attempt to use the decryption key to restore their data. The decryption key was actually legitimate, so they didn't screw them there, which they could have.
Right.
These are criminals we're talking about.
How often does that happen, right? You think
often
you're going to
enough.
get an encryption key, and you don't get it.
actually, about 5%. Honestly,
Yep.
I've actually done the research on that, and about 95% of the ransomwares that are paid result in a good decryption key. And why is that? Think about that. Mm-hmm. This is business for the hackers. Yeah. Why do they want to screw over the customer that's willing to pay?
Well, and they want other people to know that if they get hacked, they're likely are going to get the key, so just pay them, right?
Exactly. If they deliver the key, now they can go out and do it again.
Yeah.
So you think about the impact of that long term, but that's a completely different story, and we'll get into that in a ransomware episode in an upcoming series, in part of the series. But it's just fascinating the details that we didn't know. They ended up recovering a lot of the money. The Department of Justice did recover 63.7 of these Bitcoins that were used for the ransomware ransom. Unfortunately, at the time, that 63.7 was only worth $2.3 million. And why was that? Why do you think that was?
Because the price of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin had gone down. And
yes.
So it wasn't worth as much. And they paid the price for that too. So it's almost like getting it twice right there.
Right.
This was a company called DarkSide that was an Eastern European hacking organization. They're responsible for other large ransomware breaches that you've heard about in the news. And they stood up and took credit quickly for this. Now, how do you track them down? Nearly impossible, because these guys are doing this all anonymously. So, as long as you can pull this off anonymously and there's no way to police this kind of stuff, it's going to be very, very hard to make any significant changes in this anytime soon. You just have to protect yourself and educate yourself and your employees.
Well, and here's the other part to that story, right? So the hacker actually double dips, because they made this money off of Colonial Pipeline, and their leverage was Colonial Pipeline's data. They exfiltrated data, and that's the only reason why Colonial Pipeline, most definitely, not the only reason why, but most definitely a critical factor as to why Colonial Pipeline had to pay them. But those hackers now have this data, and they're turning around selling this data on the dark web and then making a profit off of that. So they're double dipping in every breach that's happening. They're not going to be out of money.
Dare I say triple dipping? Because think about this. The ransomware tactic that they used that was successful, and the code they used to breach these systems, they can resell that code to other companies too. Have you heard of ransomware as a service?
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to start hearing a lot more about ransomware as a service. Let me read this to you. Ransomware as a service, a subscription-based model that enables affiliates to use already developed ransomware tools to execute ransomware attacks. Affiliates earn a percentage of each successful ransomware payment. Ransomware as a service is an adoption of the software as a service business model.
Wow, that's a key to perpetuating this issue for years to come, and so we really need to step in and do something about it as a community of cybersecurity professionals. We've got to really get people aware of how to protect themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one other headline in the B-roll related to a meat company, or
JBS. And so JBS they ended up paying $11 million to get their key and get everything decrypted back so that they can get their systems back online. And so, when you look at the critical infrastructure nature of all of these organizations that were attacked in the last year, one key aspect to this that everyone forgets or doesn't see deeply enough, that distorted noise, the static around this, is the fact that there are residual effects to every organization that gets attacked. And those residual effects are the employees that work at these organizations, the other organizations that are dependent upon the goods and services of these organizations that were attacked also have employees and also have revenues that they're trying to meet. And so they're losing revenue, and their employees are losing wages for time not worked when they have to send their employees home. These are compounding effects for every one of these attacks. And it's not just happening to large organizations. It's happening to small and mid-sized businesses as well. And increasingly, I just talked to 2 small businesses this week where it happened at. So I think this is a real important issue that we have got to do something to get our arms around and make a difference, get change happening so that we are more protected around this and save ourselves from what's happening around these attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Would you care to guess what the average ransomware request sum was back in 2018 compared to 2021? Let's just say 2018. Take a guess.
$1 million.
A little bit high. We're talking average, so we're talking the mom and pop too. It was $5,000 on average.
Wow.
But 2020, 2 years later, it had gone over 200,000. So if you think about the exponential growth of that, why do you think that's happening? It's happening because we're paying them.
Yeah.
These people are paying these things, and they're going to continue growing up to the point where, in fact, I've got the bullet here for the largest ransomware payout, world record to date. Do you care to take a guess what the highest is that any company's ever paid?
Ransomware payout?
Yeah.
That definitely is in the millions, and it'll be $50 million.
Damn close. $40 million.
Wow.
And it was an insurance company that paid it.
Wow.
So I don't know if that means it was claimed on an insurance and the insurance company ended up having to pay it. Think about cyber insurance. Or if it was an insurance firm that ended up paying it simply just to get back business rolling again. But, $40 million.
Wow.
That's insane.
Kevin, let's do a quick recap. In the water treatment plant hack, the main cause appeared to be a diligence issue. Windows computers were not updated and patched. The attacker increased lie to 100 times the normal amount, and an entire town could have been poisoned as a result. In the gas pipeline hack, the main cause appeared to be a breakdown in policy and procedures. An employee no longer with the company had active credentials. Those credentials were reused on other web accounts, which were compromised and sold on the dark web. As a result, 45% of all fuel consumed on the East Coast was stopped. The pipeline paid 75 bitcoins to get a decryption key that was too slow to use. Panic buying ensued across multiple states, and the Department of Justice only recovered 63.7 bitcoins because the value of Bitcoin had dropped. Additionally, we covered ransomware being extremely big business, with hackers making money in up to 3 different ways on one attack. 95% of ransomware payees received a valid encryption key. The largest ransom ever paid is $40 million. And lastly, ransomware as a service has become a major business model and will continue to grow in years to come. So there's a residual effect downstream across our economy from one hack happening. Now we're saying these hacks are happening now every 11 seconds. Someone is being attacked. How many people are being impacted by an attack that's happening every 11 seconds, by attacks happening every 11 seconds? That is a large amount of economic impact that's happening within our country. And that's a very important statement for us to remember. I can tell you personally, my organization had been attacked, and when we were attacked, it's like someone breaking into your house, stealing your personal property, regardless of the defenses you've put in place. I've had, locks on my doors and bars on the windows and the door and a guard dog outside, but they found a loophole somewhere, right? And they dug a hole under the house and came up through the ground and took a few things, right? But they did everything because my alarm system went off before they could start taking everything, right? So it's things like that where you feel like a victim, and there's way too much of that's happening. And we've got to find ways to stop this, because it's not just the organizations that are being impacted. People personally are being impacted. Definitely.
I couldn't agree more. I think what you see is not only are the people impacted, they're potentially put out of work. Some people losing their jobs because the smaller the business, the harder it is to recover from the impact of something like this. And smaller companies are not the companies that are going out and buying cyber insurance to protect themselves from these types of attacks. They're not. They can't afford it. The premiums on cyber insurance have gone up in just the last 3 years, quadruple and more and beyond.
Yep.
For the same coverage. And the coverage, you got to think about the types of things that a cyber insurance policy will cover. It doesn't cover everything. And there's, insurance companies are smart. They're always looking for ways to write these things to where there's an out, Yeah. And so you got to be really careful with that too. And it's just from a personal standpoint, I can say you got to. There's many aspects to that, because if you think about regulations and laws these days, especially if you think about European law, GDPR, and things that have trickled over into the United States now, you're starting to hear about that with CCPA and SHIELD Act and things here in the States that are trying to do the same thing, but it's not quite as regulated at high a level. So now you're seeing it done at the state level here in the U.S.
But Kevin, you're bringing up a really good point. You're bringing up a really good point on this. And the point that I want to bring together is that if we just look at critical infrastructure, where we started our conversation, 85 to 90% of our critical infrastructure is privately owned and managed in this country. Mm-hmm. Okay. And now if you're saying, so that's just critical infrastructure. You look at private industry, and what we say as private owners is that the last thing we want is for the government to regulate our businesses, because government regulation is one step away from overreach into our businesses. But what that means is, if there's not going to be some type of control, unified control as a country around stopping these attacks, then it's incumbent upon each one of us, the private owners, each one of us, to then do due diligence and due care to make sure that these organizations stay safe. And not just the organizations, the employees that work for these organizations. Yeah, the people. Right?
Even more the people. More the people. Because the governments aren't coming in and regulating whether or not your data gets stolen. That's not what they're worried about. They're worried about personally identifiable information that can put a person's livelihood and their world at risk. That's what they're worried about. These are the things that aren't going to go anywhere. These things are only going to get stronger and more strict the further we go along, and the more cyber breaches you're hearing about in the news and ransomware attacks you're hearing about week to week. These things are going to continue to get more stringent, and hopefully here in the States, this stuff starts to get managed at more of a governmental level and not at a state level.
Well, I think it's important, too, that our viewers and listeners understand one big piece to this. We've talked a lot about businesses and the impact of businesses and the people personally as a result of businesses. But there's also another angle to this that is very important, and that is each one of us individually have a role to play in keeping our information safe and secure. Because if we don't keep our information safe and secure, typically that is an avenue into allowing our business that we work for to be breached. It takes one person to take their information and not keep it secure and to not follow best practices. And not only will that person's data be sold on the dark web and they will be at risk, but the organization they work for will also be at risk.
Wait a minute, Jason. So are you saying that I can't reuse my work password for my Facebook account? Because I don't want to have to remember 30 different passwords.
Well, you can, but only if you want your work to be attacked. Yeah, it's a great example, and that's what that happens often. That happens often. I mean, people don't want to remember this, 30 passwords because that's a lot, right? So they write them down.
We have a solution for this, and we will talk about this in a future episode. And I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah,
but it might have something to do with password vaults. Maybe. I don't know.
Most definitely.
A teaser. That's just a teaser.
And I think there's a lot of information that can be learned just from that. So I would invite you all to stay tuned on the next coming up set of episodes. We hope to dive into more information, as Kevin was talking about, password vaults and how do you personally keep yourself safe. But we're going to definitely dive into ransomware a little bit deeper, talk about a lot of the strategies used for ransomware, why leverage is important with ransomware, what cybersecurity insurance is all about, and what you need to know about there, and how do you personally take steps to prevent your personal information from being sold on the dark web, as well as preventing a ransomware attack from being able to even get started. So
yeah, ransomware is so big, so important, we may even spend 2 episodes on ransomware. Our very first 2 real episodes on ransomware with guests.
Most definitely. So join us in our upcoming episodes. We look forward to sharing this information with you, and we will see you then.
Take care, everybody. Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us today for the podcast. We appreciate all the help we can get in getting the word out about the podcast. So please be sure to share the podcast with your friends or anybody else that you feel might benefit from this type of information. And until next time, stay safe, take care, and we'll see you in the next episode.